bills, etc. My name is Thomas Bates. I'm the point of contact for this. Number is 206-553-2272. You can follow up afterwards.
Your name again?
Thomas Bates, B-A-T-E-S.
Can you repeat the phone number, Thomas? Sorry.
206-553-2272.
How long do you expect before we start?
Less than 30 seconds.
Okay.
Good morning. I want to thank you all for being here, and I am pleased to announce and welcome Assistant Attorney General Tom Perez and Jonathan Smith back to our district. As head of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, Tom has re-energized the department's commitment to civil rights. Jonathan has done a remarkable job in his relatively shorter tenure. And his team has been a great partner in this work with our office.
Did you just go off?
I turned it off because we were getting feedback.
We're going to hear fine.
Yeah.
You're okay? In March of this year, we informed the City of Seattle that the Department of Justice was opening an investigation into whether SPD engages in unconstitutional policing, either through the unconstitutional use of force or through discriminatory policing. We are here today to discuss the findings and conclusions we have reached and the next steps for the Department of Justice and the City of Seattle. I will be addressing the scope and conclusions of our investigation, and Tom will discuss the next steps. We will then take some questions. Before discussing our findings, I think it is very important to provide some background. Today marks a critical milestone for our community and for the Seattle Police Department. Understanding how we got to this point is very important, but how we move forward is even more important. The coming months could very well determine what the next generation of policing looks like in the City of Seattle. It also may determine the relationship between SPD and the community that it serves. While there are some very difficult and systemic issues to resolve, we are very optimistic about the future of SPD and its relationship with the City of Seattle. This optimism is based on at least three factors. First, while our investigation has found some serious constitutional deficiencies, which I will discuss in a moment, our investigation also confirmed that the great majority of Seattle Police Department officers are honorable law enforcement professionals who risk their lives to protect our community. Day in and day out, the men and women who put on the blue uniform do it to serve us. We understand that the dangers they face are very real. Our region saw firsthand the dangers that police face in our region. And throughout our investigation, we were cognizant of the realities that police officers face day to day on the street, and that they need the tools they must have to keep themselves safe and to keep the people safe. We are optimistic for the future of SPD because it has a great foundation of truly good and honorable officers. Second, we are very optimistic because of the way the city and the department have conducted themselves throughout this investigation, including as late as this morning before we came here. We were given access to every document and every witness that we asked to see, often on an expedited basis. There was candid discussion throughout our investigation as we found problems and deficiencies. We gave it to the city, and I think it is very important for the people of Seattle to know that they did not wait to act. They took steps immediately when we raised issues, and they have announced that they are implementing a number of changes to address the issues that we have found. In fact, we just met with the mayor and Chief Diaz. We met with them last night and again this morning. And they have expressed their commitment to move forward and address the issues. They are themselves committed to have the highest standard of policing. So we remain optimistic because of the commitment the city and the department have shown to having a better police force. Finally, we are optimistic because of the people of Seattle. It is clear that we have a community that supports its police, but demands they meet the highest standards. Through our investigation, we have met with many people and conducted hundreds of interviews. It is clear the people of this city will support the changes needed to make a better police department. Before we launched our investigation, we met with a number of city leaders and department things to determine, first, whether the investigation was necessary, and if two, what were some of the issues we needed to address. While we heard a broad array of opinions, there was great consistency among people in terms of what would be needed to have the best police force. It is clear we must hire and train the best candidates, we must have good supervision, and that leadership and culture must start from the top and be consistently applied all the way down the chain of command. Our investigation has shown that these early insights were true. For the past 8 months, our attorneys, and Michelle and Mike have taken the laboring oar in this, and our experts have conducted extensive interviews and reviewed thousands of pages of documents. We were given our own access to video recordings and reviewed many hours of video footage. We also met and interviewed hundreds of community members and advocates. We have concluded the following. We find there is reasonable cause to believe that the Seattle Police Department engages in a pattern or practice of using unnecessary and excessive force in violation of the United States Constitution. This finding includes violations committed both by the policing itself and the uses of force, but also by the lack of policies and supervision. There are significant deficiencies in oversight, policies and training on how to use force, when to use force, and particularly how and when to use impact weapons. Based on a randomized, stratified, and statistically valid sample working with an expert in the field, we found in the cases that we reviewed that when officers used force, it was done in an unconstitutional and excessive manner nearly 20% of the time. We found that officers too quickly resort to impact weapons, such as their batons and flashlights. When SPD officers used batons, notably, we found that 57% of the time they were used in an excessive manner. We also found that SPD officers often use excessive force when they apply force with multiple officers against a single person. And we found that SPD officers sometimes escalate situations, particularly with people who have either mental health issues or are affected by drugs or alcohol, which was a significant finding because SPD's own study has shown that when they use force, 70% of the time it is against people from those populations. I want to take a moment to stress something that I think is important. I think it's important for people to understand that the vast majority of police officers do not use force in a given year. You will see in the report that we've provided graphs, but this is a depiction of the force used, all uses of force in one year, 2010. In that year, 789 of the officers used force no time at all. 234 officers used force one time or less. 105 officers used force 2 times. You will see over here that 44 officers used force an excessive number of times, 5 to 6 times, 7 to 14 times. These 44 officers accounted for 30% of the reported uses of force in the year. So what we're seeing is the great and honorable work done by the vast majority of police officers in the Seattle Police Department is being undercut by a subset. And one of the goals we must have is to address our supervision, our training, and our policies to make sure that those uses of force get greater attention. Key to this, of course, is oversight. When we looked at the issue of oversight, we found that supervisors regularly hold their officers accountable for excessive force. Equally troubling is there's virtually no review at the supervisory level of use of force. Uses of force is supposed to be reviewed by supervisors and then up the chain of command. We looked at 1,230 use of force reports for a whole year, all of the use of force packages. Startling, of that over 1,200 reports, only 5 were ever sent back and asked to get more information. It has become almost a rubber stamp process as things work up the line, rather than using it as a tool to see why is an officer using force, was it appropriate, would there be better training or policies that would allow that officer to do his job safely without using that force. We also found that the system that is designed to respond to citizens' complaint, the Office of Professional Accountability, has over the years become somewhat difficult to navigate. There are too many ways that complaints can go that disallow for having centralized accountability. Indeed, we found that sometimes complaints can be made to other areas and branches of the city that never find their way to the OPA. So you will see in our report that we have made a number of recommendations, specific recommendations on how to improve the OPA process. In addition to these formal findings, we also looked at the issue of...
It's not,
Yeah.
yeah, we're getting a lot of dropouts.
Can you bring it closer to it maybe a little bit? Maybe further away then.
Matter, turn off the light, is your thing out?
Did you turn off?
Maybe we can turn that mic off and your mic on.
Is that better?
No, I think that's the problem.
That's the problem.
This is problem.
You need to shut that one off.
Yeah, that was, it's got a short on
Yeah,
the
that was-
cable or something.
There is no.
It's got a short cord.
Or the battery's dying or something.
Sir, are you Attorney Grant?
Yes, I am.
If it's down here, can you hear it on this?
Go ahead and click it on.
Click it on.
Sorry about that.
And she plays one on TV.
Yes. I thought about saying that.
Test, test, test,
Did we hear that one?
There we go.
test, test, test.
Doesn't sound like better in law.
You were still getting a lot of hits. It's unusable.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
It's too far from its
No, that
base,
sounds-
it's wireless, it's too far away from your base.
No, turn that off.
This is
It
off.
is up. Now it sounds okay. There's no,
That's fine.
no interference.
Oh, it's okay now.
1, 2, 3.
There we go.
For now, yeah.
Excellent. If it happens again, let us know.
We will.
It was all the good stuff.
You'll be one of the first to know.
Yes.
All right. The other significant issue that we looked at was whether there was, we could make a finding relating to discriminatory policing. We also looked at policies, procedures, did hundreds of interviews, documents. We determined we could not make a finding that Seattle Police Department engages in a pattern and practice of discriminatory policing. But we did find indicia of some troubling signs that we have told the Seattle Police Department that we believe merit additional review. For example, in those cases where our experts reviewed cases and found that excessive force was used, a majority of those cases involved people of color. In addition, a number of data that is maintained by the Seattle Police Department indicates that in those precincts that are heavily populated by people of color, that a disproportionate amount of street stops and other types of investigatory practices involve people of color. Standing alone, it is impossible to determine whether that indicates there is a problem of biased policing, but it is enough of an issue that we think it merits further review by the Seattle Police Department. At the heart of one of the problems of the community perception is that there is confusion among Seattle police officers, at least some, as to when and where they can stop civilians and require them to stay. There is a police, if they have articulable suspicion that they believe that criminal activity is occurring, they can stop and detain a person. They can stop and talk to anyone they want, and we want our police to be proactive, to be talking to people on the street when they see something suspicious, to engage. But they have to understand that without the legal basis, if they ask someone to stop and that person says no, the person is free to walk away. And there is some very, it clearly needs more clear policies and guidelines and training with regards to those types of pedestrian stops. Before I turn it over to Tom, who will discuss our path forward, I'd like to talk about where we're going. I want to make a couple of closing remarks. First, I think it's very important, we did not set out to resolve the facts of any of the more high-profile incidents that have saturated the public in recent months in the last year. Our job was to look, we did look at those cases, but our job was to look and take a broader view to determine whether there was a pattern in practice of constitutional policing. Throughout our investigation, we had to be mindful of, and I want to say this again, the realities that police officers face on the street. They have a very tough job. They have a job that is critical to our public safety. And it is, for them, always challenging. I think what this is important to know is most police officers in a given year are never put in a position where they have to use force. It is a minority of officers that are in that position. The sheer number of times a person uses force does not mean that force was excessive. I'll say that again. Just because an officer has to use force multiple times does not mean that force was excessive. But the supervisor should be asking that question. There should be a system in place where they recognize quickly when an officer is having to use force a disproportionate amount of times and intervening to determine whether that officer needs additional training, whether there's better tactics, and the like. So one of the reasons for our optimism, again, is because we think that there can be some very swift action addressed to a very narrow band of police officers using force on the street that can have an immediate impact on how policing is done in the city. I'm now going to turn it over to Tom, who will give some remarks, and then we'll answer some questions.
Good morning, and thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I cannot think of a better partner than U.S. Attorney Jenny Durkan, not only on this, but on other civil rights matters. She is simply a star, and the team, and we have two of our team members here to my left, has done remarkable work and continues to do remarkable work listening and learning from the community of stakeholders in this case. When we began, we had a simple mission. We wanted to ensure that Seattle has a police force that reduces crime, respects the Constitution, and enjoys the confidence of the public. If you don't have the confidence of the public, you can't do your job. These are the three goals that are the guideposts to all of our policing work across the country. As Jenny Durkan has described, our investigation here has been indeed independent, exhaustive, and very inclusive. Our attorneys, our investigators, and our experts conducted extensive interviews with command staff and rank-and-file officers, participated in ride-alongs, reviewed thousands of pages of documents. We met with and interviewed hundreds of community members and attended many advocacy meetings. I had the good fortune, we had the good fortune, I should say, of meeting just a short time ago, this morning, with the mayor and with Chief Diaz. This was the second meeting that was conducted with them in the last 16 to 17 hours or so. And these dialogues were very constructive and very candid, and they were, I think, very effective. And throughout this process, as Jenny Durkan has correctly described, we provided real-time feedback to SPD, and they took that feedback, and it was very important that, that it happened. So, for instance, on November the 23rd, we outlined our concerns about SPD's application of the Garrity rule and how it should be applied in a way that protects officers against self-incrimination while allowing for the full investigation of allegations of misconduct. This is a critical issue, and we continue to work on it. I share Jenny's optimism about the future. And let me say, in making that statement, we have more pattern and practice investigations, 20 to be precise, across the country than ever before. I've been to many communities. I was in Phoenix yesterday. I have been to other communities in recent weeks. And my optimism is based not only on what we've observed here, but I have seen in my work across the country what the building blocks that are necessary to be in place are. And I believe those building blocks of reform are here in Seattle. And so while these findings are undeniably serious, and we have discussed and will again discuss a number of ways in which we think SPD is broken, we will indeed be able to fix the problem, because the will is there at the highest levels of the department. The officers in this department are remarkable, and their spirit is remarkable, and so I have that optimism. But reform takes time. It is not only about a change in policy, it's about a change in culture. New procedures must be put in place and sustained until they become part of the DNA of the department. Building community trust is a long-term and ongoing process. It requires transparency and engagement to create that blueprint for a sustainable reform. And with all investigations of this nature, what also is required as a precondition for reform is that you not only diagnose the problem, but you understand the root causes. And the reason, one of the many reasons I do feel this optimism is because we have indeed peeled the onion to its core. And I believe we understand not only the formal findings that Jenny described, but the root causes. And so that is why I believe moving forward we will make significant progress in short order. In this investigation, I should note two issues particularly jumped out at us, and Jenny has described them already. First, we found that the systems of accountability are broken. And you should look at Appendix A. Jenny described this chart about the fact that there's a small number of officers who are responsible for a large number of uses of force. And if you look at Appendix A, what Appendix A shows you, there's a lot of dots there. But the punchline of Appendix A is that people who are using force with much more frequency, that are described in that red circle, are frequently not being reviewed. The early warning systems are not flagging these officers. Many of these officers may have a perfectly legitimate justification for their activities, while others may not. We don't know the answer because the accountability systems have not been put in place. And that is very important. That is broken and needs to be repaired. Frontline supervision is another key element. I often say that in addition to the chief, the sergeant or the first line supervisor is among the most important person in the department, because they set that tone. They see your officers day in and day out. They can identify potential problems and fix them before they become huge problems. And frontline supervisors need more hands-on contact with frontline officers. And we are grateful, again, that the department recognizes this and is not waiting for this report to begin the process of addressing it. There needs to be more data collected. Issues with incomplete and deficient data report writing need to be fixed, and the timeline for the OPA investigative process needs to be shortened. The complaint investigation process itself needs to be streamlined and simplified to provide more transparency to the public. So we must also, in addition, I said there were two issues that we observed, and I just described the first. We must also talk about the issue of trust. Because again, I'm a prosecutor. I've been a prosecutor on and off for over 20 years. My currency is the trust I have in the courtroom and with the community. If I don't have the community to help me out, I can't solve crime. It's that simple. And so we must continue to work to ensure that we have the trust of the public. And that is one reason, a very important reason, why our process has been so inclusive. Because this is the people's department. And we must, moving forward, continue that process, and we will continue that process of listening, engaging with all the stakeholders, people in the department, people outside the department. And let me talk about where we will go from here. We will take these findings and we will continue that engagement I just described with the mayor and the chief and so many others, so that we can take this report and transform our findings into a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable reform. Sustainability is what it's all about. We're not interested in fixes that'll last a year or two, but then result in backsliding. We need sustainable reform. And such reform must be part, in our judgment, of a court order and must include the assistance of an independent monitor. And we will work with SPD and other stakeholders in this regard. The SPD has shown, as we have said, a deep commitment to the reform process. We will continue to provide that real-time feedback to them and to others. Before we conclude and take your questions, I would like to address two key stakeholders, two key sets of stakeholders who have been so important thus far and will continue to be important. First, to the men and women of SPD. We indeed honor the difficult work that you do day in and day out, and believe that addressing the core systemic problems in SPD will in the end make your job easier, safer, and more rewarding. I have profound respect for law enforcement. It is precisely that respect that motivates Jenny and I to be working on these issues so that every officer can work effectively and have the tools to succeed, and our community can indeed ensure that our department is reducing crime, respecting the Constitution, and enjoying the confidence of the public. We appreciate the feedback we have gotten from the men and women of SPD. We will continue to enlist their feedback. We look forward to hearing your reactions to our report and to learning your suggestions about the road ahead. And to the people of Seattle, our goal is to continue to help restore the department into an organization in which the public has confidence and trust. This is only possible with your continued engagement, and we look forward to continuing to hear your input as well. I've been around the country in this work, and in every community I have gone to, I can point to elements of our accountability documents that have been a direct outgrowth of ideas from community members, from frontline police officers, from other key stakeholders in the process. We do not have a monopoly in the federal government on good ideas. That is why we listen and we learn and we engage, and we will do that. And I cannot think of a better partner in that engagement than my friend and colleague Jenny Durkan. I am absolutely confident that the road ahead is an exciting road, because it is a road in which we can ensure that SPD is a department that will indeed enjoy the respect of everyone and will indeed be effective, because effective policing and constitutional policing are not in tension. In fact, quite the opposite. Effective policing and constitutional policing go hand in hand, and that is exactly what we will construct here in a collaborative fashion in Seattle. Thank you very much, Jenny. Thank you for your remarkable leadership, not just throughout this process, but for so many years in which you have been working on this critical issue. And I want to thank the team We have 2 members of the team here, but we have many others scattered about the room. We will be sticking around. We will be continuing our outreach in the weeks ahead to transform this document into that reform document, and we look forward to your views. Questions?
General, you used the term, you talked about the optimism that you feel about the police department to be able to correct these problems. But you used the word broken 3 times to describe the Seattle Police Department in one way or another. How can those who have participated in the breaking of it how can the public feel confident that they can fix it, as you have said they can?
Because we've done it elsewhere, and we can do it here. Because the will exists to fix the problem. You look at places like Los Angeles, where there were problems that were frankly far more wide-ranging than exist in Seattle. And we were able to work with key stakeholders in the department and in the community to design and implement a comprehensive blueprint for sustainable reform. And the Los Angeles Police Department today bears little resemblance to the Los Angeles Police Department of 12 years ago. And that was a department that had far greater challenges than Seattle. And so we've diagnosed the problem. We have discussed this diagnosis with the department. They have been with us throughout that. And that fact, and the fact that we have such an engaged community, apathy would be far more troubling, and we have anything but apathy in this community. And given that fact, I am indeed optimistic.
And I want to add to that, I think another reason we can have that confidence is some of the changes have been started to be made already. For example, Tom mentioned that one of the key things for any department is that frontline supervisor, the sergeant. And one of the things we heard early on in our briefing meetings was there was a change in the way that supervision was done, and they had what they called inter-squad relief, which basically the same sergeant wasn't seeing the same squad of officers all the time. They've changed that because they understand they need to have that kind of supervision. So there are a number of factors and things they've already known that they need to fix. They're fixing it. We will continue to work with them on some remedies.
A follow-up, if I may. In the Los Angeles Police Department, there has been a change at the top, though. At least one that I'm aware of. And so the question is, should there be a change at the top of the SPD in the view of DOJ?
That is not something that we opine on as DOJ or we the U.S. attorneys. That is a calculation that the mayor of Seattle has to make. I will say this. We met last night with Chief Diaz. We met with Chief Diaz this morning. He has stated unequivocally his willingness to continue to fix and address these problems. We will leave the political judgments to other people, but what we will say is there's no question that Chief Diaz has spoken to us, as has the mayor, of their willingness to move forward.
And we have addressed these problems in other communities across the country with chiefs, with elected officials, and we've done so successfully.
General Perez, first, could you, if you have so much optimism in the department, could you explain to me why it is that you're putting in place a court order and a special monitor? And could you elaborate on that a little bit,
Sure.
As to how that's going to work?
You heard me use the word sustainability. And in my experience, the key here is to make sure that reform is not simply a 2 or 3 year phenomenon. The people in the chair evolve in leadership positions. And so the key we have found in the course of our experience is to ensure that reforms stick over time, and you have accountability mechanisms to measure that. These problems did not simply occur or have their roots over the last 12 months. These problems were many years in the making, and they will be many years in the solving. And if you want to have sustainability, you have to have that level of accountability. And that was a key to success in Los Angeles and elsewhere.
Can you explain that process for me a little bit, though, how that works?
Well, what we intend to do, as we outlined to the mayor and to the chief today, is to continue this process of engagement. We've taken this report. We're going to continue to have conversations with key stakeholders in and outside the government and talk about, so how do we fix accountability? What needs to be in that document relating to first-line supervision? What reforms need to be made to the various structures that exist now? Then you memorialize that in a document. You file that document with a court. You come into a consensus on an independent person with expertise and respect to monitor, and then you get to the business of implementation.
Does that require a lawsuit being filed at this point?
Well, the structure I just described would be a collaborative structure in which both a lawsuit, a complaint, and the accountability document would be filed simultaneously. So you're under that construct, and this is the road we hope to go down. You're not spending time litigating the existence of a problem. You're going right into the problem-solving phase. So day one, you file a document, you file a complaint, and the accountability document.
So you're going to sue the
right
department today?
No, not at all. Not at all. We're going to work with the department in the months ahead to figure out what's going on.
I was just going to say, what do you say to officers at the Seattle Police Department or other departments who've been investigated around the country? This has kind of been more of a trend in recent years, that feel their hands are being tied. They can't do their job anymore. It's rougher on them out in the community than ever because people get in their face more than ever.
I think a couple of things of that is, there's no question that life on the street is hard for police officers, and you see that there can be increasing numbers. But if you look at the real data, what we see is the majority of officers can do their job day in, day out in a year with never using force. And so we are not looking for a department that is spending its time back in the station house filling out forms. You see in other areas and other departments that there is a way to supervise adequately those officers who are using force, and particularly those who are using it time and time and time again, to make sure that that officer is not put in a position where he has to use force over and over again. And whether there's training that could help, whether there's tactics that could help, whether there's even other duties that that officer should have. And so really, I think that the message police officers in Seattle should have is the vast majority of them are doing their job well and honorably. We owe it to them to get this right.
Mr. Perez, I have a question. Of the cases that you determined to be unnecessary excessive force, that involved over 50% of minorities. And yet you say that you don't reach a finding of discriminatory policing. How can that be?
That's a really good question.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Let me answer it first, just because that part I was more involved in the overall review. Data can be a dangerous thing. There can be, if you look at the criminal justice system as a whole, people of color, minorities are disproportionately represented in all phases. Police stops, arrests, convictions, prisons. It's a very complicated issue that one data alone doesn't necessarily mean that it is engendered by an animus towards a person because they're a person of color. But it is enough of a flag that it needs to be looked at more carefully to say, is this a result of the fact that there is, as we have found, a pattern in practice of using excessive force, and the people that it is being used against, whether it's the time of day, the communities being used, the part of the city and the like, there can be a lot of reasons for it. We want to make sure it's not because they're people of color, and SPD does too. But standing alone, that piece of data is not enough for us to conclude that there's discriminatory policing.
There's a distinction between correlation and causation, and we take this job very seriously of making these findings, and I think Jenny has really is spot on in describing the situation.
Brian?
Jenny, those who signed on to the original letter probably believed strongly that there was a discriminatory problem inside the Seattle Police Department. You're asking the Seattle Police Department to take a closer look at that. Can you build the community confidence by having SPD look at the question of discriminatory policy, or does OCR have to stay involved?
I think that you will see through this process as we hopefully move forward to address the blueprint remedy and real reforms that Tom has discussed. Embedded in that is looking at these types of issues and giving them the technical assistance. One thing that is good about the Department of Justice is we have a broad umbrella of things to help departments to look at issues just like this, and we've done it around the country. So we're not saying, go look, good luck to you. We will help them, we will give them tools, we will give them resources. For example, a related thing in the use of force is, as part of our investigation, we have found that the method that training occurs at the State Academy is one that has emphasized command and control and use of force and de-emphasized de-escalation. So police officers are taught to to win fights, but they're not taught how to avoid them. And so we obviously don't want the police to be on the losing end of a fight. But we also want, particularly when there's people with mental health issues or issues of substance abuse, to have those tools for de-escalation. Chief Diaz, Sue Rohr, and others went to the Department of Justice and just received a $400,000 grant to institute that exact type of training at the academy. And so fixing this will take building blocks from the recruiting to the training to the supervising, and all of it is meshed together. So this is not, we think there's problems, go at it. We want to have a holistic view, and we're here to help the department do that.
Jen, can you talk about any commonality between those 44 officers? Are they all in a particular unit, particular area of the city, anything like that?
No, and I think when you get to 44 officers, I think to draw conclusions about any particular precinct, beat, or squad would not be a fair assessment of the data. So we can't, I don't think there's enough commonality for us to say, hey, here's the problem, it's X precinct or X watch or X type of squad.
So these officers were spread around the city then?
We didn't granulate it to draw those conclusions because it wouldn't be statistically significant enough, is what I'm told.
Hello. Is the Department of Justice investigating Seattle Police Department's use of force on protesters engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience, or supervisor review, or will that be occurring?
There's two parts to that component. First is as you make your way through the report, you'll see that the question of pepper spray in particular is an issue that has been raised nationwide. It's an issue in a number of departments, and it's an issue that folks are grappling with on a nationwide basis. The Justice Department is looking at that to find a nationwide fix and best practices, and Seattle Police Department itself is going to be engaged in that process themselves, independently came to that. In terms of use of force and protests, that is part of the whole training for use of force and when to do it. So we won't look at in that particular issue, but obviously police officers have to have particular training and tactical plans when they're encountering protesters that might be different than ordinary street duty.
Follow-up? Follow-up?
Go ahead.
Yes. Will the Department of Justice also be investigating certain cases where members of the media and people are being filmed where that is being hidden, I guess, during police action? If you want me to clarify, I will do so.
No, I understand what you mean. We won't be investigating particular instances of whether we think that the police department needs to be producing more videos or more transparency. Clearly, to regain community trust, the more transparency there is, the better. And I think that the mayor and the police chief recognize that. There's been a number of incidents where people have tried to sue for public records. Hopefully they will look at that on the issue of transparency. And again, we are in a position where we think we can offer some best practices for nationwide.
Follow-up?
Follow-up here.
Well, if I just get your broad assessment, I know it's not subject to this report, but since you touched on it, your broad assessment of how SPD has handled these larger protest events like Occupy in the last couple of months. What's your sense of how that's been handled?
I think that is a very multi-layered question, and one that I think I'm not in a position and have enough data to reach a conclusion on behalf of the Department of Justice. But it goes from everything from what is the technical plan before it occurs, who's in charge of the scene, what is used to de-escalate force, and the like. Seattle Police Department is not alone. We've seen nationwide that police departments have been grappling with what the proper response should be to these protests. We here in Seattle have a history when we had the WTO here, and we had, a bad reaction on the streets, and I think we learned some lessons. I think SPD would be the first to say, particularly the line officers, that, we need more tools because some of those protests are getting more confrontational and more violent. And that there's an element that are not just peaceful demonstrators, but people who are actually, throwing bricks and rebar and light against police officers. So we can't answer that. I think it's a multi-thing, but obviously in the use of force, the department is going to have to look at that and make some decisions.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how Seattle compares to other police departments you've investigated?
Well, again, we have about 20 investigations underway right now, and there are. The use of force issue is an issue that comes up in most of the investigations that we're looking at, and So in that sense, the good news is that there are solutions out there. Fixing this does not involve reinventing wheels. There have been a number of best practices that have been implemented in places across the country. And that's why when I was asked, why am I optimistic? I'm optimistic because I have observed the challenges that exist here elsewhere, and I have observed those challenges get fixed in ways that were productive and sustainable. And
Clarification.
So I think that we can, while the problems are undeniably serious, and we noted that in the settings and issues that we described, there are systems here that are broken, but those systems that are broken, I'm quite confident can be fixed in a sustainable fashion.
We have time for one more question.
We'll take two more, there and then there.
From a national perspective, you said that there's 20 departments.
Yes.
Is this now become a more of a front burner issue with DOJ than it has been in the past? I mean, if so, why now these investigations?
Because they're important. The hallmark of a robust democracy is an effective, constitutionally operating police department, and part of our mission in enforcing the civil rights laws is to ensure that we're enforcing all of the laws, and our jurisdiction under this law is a very important law, and so we have been able to use this authority to help transform communities. And what's interesting to note, and you were asking a very good question, increasingly we are now coming into communities actually at their request, because police chiefs and others are seeing that there's a lot of value added. There are a lot of vexing problems that require an outside, independent set of eyes and ears and insights. And so that product, that reality has resulted in more work, and I welcome that, because again, there are few things more important than having a police department that is effective.
Just to work on your blueprint, what's your time frame? What's your timeline? How much time are you going to give the city to come together and figure this out with you before you may have to get a little more aggressive in pushing them?
The city just got the full document today. They need to read through it. They need to spend some time analyzing it. We will sit down with them after the first of the year to determine what the best way forward is, where they may need more information, where we may need more information, and we'll try to plot out a time frame. The key thing is, obviously, we want to do it expeditiously. We worked very hard to get this investigation done in a quick time frame so that it was not something that hung over the department for years at a time, which can happen sometimes in these investigations. And we did that because we had great collaboration between our office and Civil Rights Division, and because we were able to devote the resources to it. In terms of what the reform looks like and how long that oversight lasts, the hope would be not a day longer than it's needed.
Can you tell us more about the special monitor, Mr. Perez? Is someone physically going to be in Seattle overseeing the Seattle Police Department from the Justice Department, or how is that done?
That's one of the items that we will discuss in the weeks and months ahead as we develop the blueprint that we're talking about. That's an item that we discuss, and our goal there is to have somebody who has the requisite experience and respect to ensure that this accountability document is being carried out in an effective way, and independence as well. So that's a person who's not working for us. He's not working for the department. He's really working for the people to make sure that the document is put in place. And so we hope that will be part of the global resolution.
Has the court order been filed, and
No,
does it have a date?
No, there won't be a date. That will be basically the end of the process of SPD when we sit down with them, negotiate what it looks like, what are the issues that have to be addressed, what are the remedies that are going to be addressed, who the monitor is. That would be the hope for course, and then we file it with the court, and it's ordered by the court.
And then that has a date on it? All of this has to be completed by this date?
Yes, so there'll be metrics and milestones.
And you don't know when that court order will be filed yet?
Correct.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What time?
We can fit it in, yeah. I'm just gonna have it through here.
You guys are the ones.
I'm always reluctant to do that because every